will forever be a legend here at Tottenham. It's a massive club. Everything I do is for the long term.
And still Ricky Villa. What a fantastic run. He scored.
Gascoigne going to have a crack. He is, you know. Oh, he's there.
Here's Lucas Moura. Oh, they done it. The wait for silverware is over.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Tottenham Way podcast and another bouncy edition of the Tottenham Way podcast because for the second time in the space of 4 days, Spurs have won at home. They haven't conceded and they've given themselves a decent opportunity at least of finishing in the top 8 of the Champions League. I guess we shouldn't get too carried away by a 3-0 victory against Slavia Prague or Slavia Praha if we're going to be UEFA compliant, but you can only beat the team that's put in front of you, and Spurs did that very comprehensively on Tuesday night. I'm Marcus Buckland in the company this time around of Tom Allnutt of The Times, who was there, who enjoyed the atmosphere. We'll talk about the Slavia Praha fans who, well, they were incredible after the game. Tom Barkley sent a little video 10 minutes after the final whistle. They were all there chanting, cheering. They've not always been perfect on their travels. There have been issues with the supporters. There was an issue with the LGBTQ flag as well that we'll touch on a bit later. But Tom, let's start with the real positives. A 3-0 victory. Kudus scores. Xavi scores again, albeit from the spot. Our good friend, Mr. Own Goal, scores again. That's 3 in the Champions League, and Spurs have gone past the 100 mark in terms of goals in that competition. So on the face of things, they did everything asked of them. Were you satisfied with what you saw?
Hi, Marcus. I mean, I think we can be pretty positive, can't we? I mean, I think we can't be sniffy about home wins at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, right? I mean, it's been, we can't go on about how the record has been really poor and the performances have been poor. And then when they get a really good win like this, I think we have to be happy about it for sure. And I mean, the asterisks are there. I think everyone will know that Slavia Prague, let's just say this from the outset, I think we're a really poor team. And all 3 goals were gifts. I mean, you're right. I mean, Spurs probably would have wanted maybe the 100th Champions League goal to be something a little bit more off their own back because, I mean, I can't really remember seeing an own goal like that. I mean, to be honest, there was that one, wasn't there? I mean, was it Villarreal? Was it where the goalkeeper basically just threw it in? Yeah. But I mean, this one was even like a step on because the guy just, Zima, it was just a nice little cushioned header, back into the goal. He just sort of powered it past his own keeper. And then the 2 penalties, obviously, as well, were basically nonsensical fouls. So, just Slavia were awful, let's just say that. But equally, after the Fulham defeat, if we'd said they're going to go away to Newcastle, get a 2-2 draw, away from home, middle of the week, where I don't think many of us really predicted they'd get a result. And then they'd come out of these 2 home games with 5 goals, none conceded, and 6 points. I think we definitely would have taken that. So we have to say it's been a great response from where they were, almost 10 days ago.
It has been. I have to say there have been 1 or 2 negative comments that have been directed to me this morning to put into the podcast. I'll come to a couple of those in just a moment. And before we go into more details with regards to the game, Tom, I think ultimately what we will remember more than anything else about last night is the glorious return of Sonny, the smile plastered to his face, the wonderful address he gave to the crowd. And it struck me watching that, how, he's done everything the right way. An incredible 10 years at the club. He's rewarded with his magnificent mural that was unveiled as well yesterday. And while I watched Sonny bask in the glory, I was thinking of Mohammed, who has forever forfeited the right to enjoy that sort of adulation if he ever does go back to Anfield, assuming his Liverpool career is about to come to an end. Alexander Isak as well. He'll never go back to Newcastle and receive that sort of love. And every story is different. But Sonny is held so dearly to the hearts of all Spurs fans. And I just wonder, actually, Tom, a question, I don't want to be controversial. Do you think he's more loved, though, than Harry Kane? Because he stayed till the bitter end and he left with a piece of silverware as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, that, isn't it? And I guess it's not quite finished yet, let's say that, because if Harry does come back, maybe he's still got a few chapters still to be written at Spurs. But I think as it stands, I think there is an argument to say that Son's relationship with the fans, I think, is something really special, and I think that is because, as you said, Marcus, bottom line, he stayed. He stayed all the way through. Through the thick and thin, and there was a lot of thin in there as well. And and obviously winning that trophy in Bilbao, and the defining image really of that success was him hoisting the cup. And all the players clearly were absolutely delighted for him with the final whistle. I think it was Maddison who basically ran straight over to Son. And quite a few of them said that their first thought was him. And I think it's partly his character. He's such a sort of lovely guy, isn't he? And the way he played on the pitch. How much he gave. As well. He was always so sort of heart on his sleeve the way he played, not just with his technical brilliance, but with his running as well. But I think bottom line, I think it's just because he stayed. He continued all the way through to the end. And although Kane is Kane, and I think there's an argument to say he's the greatest Tottenham player ever. But I think there is something special about Son. And they always used to say that Son sold the most shirts on match day. In the club shop. Every single weekend. You go to the Tottenham training ground, and I always have memories of that snaking queue, outside the training ground of hundreds of mainly Korean, but not only Korean fans, waiting for Sonny to kind of come out. And, he could have gone out the back door always at the training ground. There's always an option to go out the secret door and you don't have to go and deal with the fans outside the front. But he used to ride his golf buggy all the way down to the front entrance of the training ground, sign the autographs, accept a lot of presents, by the way. He got given a lot of gifts as well. So he does something in it for him. But do all the selfies, he'd be there for a half an hour or whatever it was. And this is most days, at Hotspur Way. And I think the fans, they recognise those little things. It wasn't just about Son being a superstar. It was about what he gave to the fans on an average day, and I think that was kind of part of his special quality. I mean, it was a really nice moment last night, it was. And all the fans were there before kickoff. Clearly, it was a great plan from the club as well to generate a brilliant atmosphere just before the game, because all the fans were in early. It was 1:45, I think, when he kind of came out in his long grey coat and black scarf, and I was surprised. I thought that maybe they would do a couple of questions or whatever, but I didn't think they would really put him on the spot quite as much as they did. They just gave him the mic and basically said, take the floor, and he was in the middle of the pitch delivering a slightly sort of squeaky, emotional speech, but it was good. And of course, he finished with a "Come on, you Spurs," and said that the club would always be in his heart, and he invited the fans to come out and see him in LA. And it went down a storm. Of course, it was like one of those best man speeches. Everyone was with him, everyone wanted the jokes to land, and they did. And it was a really nice moment.
Yes, you might panic if 47,000 people take up his offer to go to Los Angeles and stay with him. And that was the official attendance again last night, Tom. I thought it was a really good PR move to have Sonny at that game to encourage more people to go. But we've touched on this before. They're still not getting huge crowds for Champions League matches in comparison to league games. Slavia Prague, okay, they're not the most attractive of opposition. But do you still think maybe the club has to look at its ticketing policy a bit more closely with some of these Champions League games?
I think they do, and I think they are. I think they are looking at it. I think they're aware that it's definitely not ideal, the attendances they've had, and clearly it's not a one-off. This has been consistent now through this season's competition, and I think there are 2 or 3 reasons for this. And Marcus, you're on the ground here, and maybe you know more than I do, but I think the pricing is clearly, slightly out of kilter with where it should be for these matches, to be honest. Everyone has to adjust to the fact that in the Champions League new format, these league games are no longer the stellar fixtures in the calendar. Tottenham's biggest game this week is probably away at Nottingham Forest at the weekend. It's not at home to Slavia Prague, and that is just the new reality of this Champions League phase. I mean, I think there's also ticketing issues in there. It's harder now to kind of resell tickets and to shift them on, which I think makes it very difficult for fans midweek who can't go for whatever reasons, for work or family or whatever, who would like to kind of pass those tickets on. I think that's much more complicated than it should be. So I think, bottom line is they need to look at the pricing, don't they? And they need to make it easier to pass them on, because going into the knockout stages, okay, those games, they're going to be more attractive, clearly. So maybe that will solve the problem in itself. But I also think for next season, let's, be positive and say they're in the Champions League again. I think they will want to make these attendances in the group phase much better. I mean, what's your view Do you think it's the pricing bottom line, or is it the quality of the opposition?
Probably a bit of both, but I think it would
Mm.
be, it's a difficult one because you've obviously got people who've got season. I don't understand exactly how it all works actually, because unfortunately, although I'm a season ticket holder, because of my working schedule, I can't get to home games in the Champions League. So I haven't looked closely at the pricing, but it's just struck me week after week that obviously we're not getting anywhere near as many people going to these games as to the Premier League games, and I'm sure it's the nature of the opposition to a degree, but it will be interesting to see what the attendance is for the Dortmund game. And obviously now the fact that Spurs picked up 3 points last night leaves them just outside the top eight, the automatic 8 places that will go through to the next round. The Dortmund match is going to be critical. Then Eintracht Frankfurt away. If they don't get a sellout for Dortmund, we know they've got an issue. In terms of who would have impressed Sonny most last night, was it the X-Man again? He's now, of course, scored 2 in 2, albeit from the penalty spot, but he was running around all over the place, lovely touches. He's quite an exuberant character, Xavi Simons, as well, isn't he? Loves to play up to the crowd. He's very animated facially. It seems to me as though he's really growing into himself in more ways than one.
Yeah, I thought it was good. Again, I've really got to say, I think he's really coming into his own, Xavi Simons. I think I don't think he's at his kind of peak. I don't think he's anywhere near where he'll want to be. But I look at him playing now, and I think he's a completely different player to the one we saw, a month or 2 months ago for sure. He's playing with a lot more confidence. I think he's also looks sharper. I think he looks fitter to me. Like he looks like someone who has suddenly got match practice. Someone who basically who's played in the kind of heat of the competition now for a couple of months, and maybe there's an adjustment there in terms of the Premier League. But I also just think he's doing things quicker. Like the issue I think we all had in the first couple of months with Xavi was that everything was taking too long, too many touches, too many times looking up, checking again, and maybe he's just been too used to having that amount of time, in other leagues. And I think in the Premier League you get pressed so quickly, you have to make your decisions fast. And let's be honest, I think he doesn't. I was saying this to Tom. We were sitting next to each other last night, and I don't. He looks better to me when he plays one touch or two touches. When he draws contact and he starts to kind of try and wriggle through people, I think that's when he gets into trouble, because ultimately, we know he hasn't really got the physique for it. He's not the quickest. I wouldn't say he's slow, but he's not the quickest either. So the best thing I think when he does is when he's in tight areas and he bounces the ball off people. There was a really nice move in midfield where someone played it into him and he had his back to his back to his marker. And he played a lovely little round the corner to, I think it was Spence, possibly, or maybe Kudus, can't remember. And he got it back off him. He ran behind and got it back off him. And I think that just, he's got great quickness of thought, and when he does things fast and decisively, people can't keep up with him, And I think he's one of those players, he gets away from people by moving the ball around them. He doesn't get away from people by sort of, trying to outmuscle people and run through. I know people will be saying, well, look at his goal last weekend where he basically, ran 20 yards. True, but it was open space. I think when he's trying to get through people, that's when he gets into trouble. And I think he's learning. I see a player right now who's really learning quickly. And I think Frank we're really pleased with that. It was great he got his goal, that he took the penalty. Now got 2 goals in 2. I just thought overall it wasn't perfect, but I think we're seeing Xavi Simons really come to the fore now in this team. And I think that's really important for Tottenham.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that assessment. His touches are fantastic. When he does, as you say, when he does try and wriggle through a couple of players, he tends to lose the ball. At least he did last night. Maybe he's still trying a little bit too hard, but he's most certainly moving in the right direction. We love
Marcus,
questions and comments. Go on, sorry, Tom.
No, I was just going to say the character point as well. I think is important, because I think we've said before with this team, like there aren't sort of at the moment any sort of standout, dazzling kind of maverick stars that Tottenham love to have in the team that the fans can really get behind. And I think the personality that Xavi has, I think, is a really important kind of part of his persona. And obviously it has to be channeled in the right direction. He's been a superstar ever since he was 10 years old basically. And that he has that kind of aura about him, and it can go in either direction, I think. But if he uses it positively, he's definitely someone the fans can. It's not that arrogance, is it? But it's just that certain kind of charisma, you know, like a little bit of stardust that he has, which I think really elevates the team. It elevates the kind of the atmosphere in the stadium as well. So, you know, I'm all for it. You know, I think he's one of those players who, you know, the celebration, as you say, the smile, the kind of the little tricks. I think that's what Tottenham fans love. You know, they love that kind of player. I think he can bring something to the mood, you know, with his personality as well.
We definitely need a player like that. We'll talk about James Maddison a bit later on, who, of course, was on television the other night, was back at the training ground at the start of the week, had his arm around Thomas Frank. Actually spoke really nicely, I thought, about how he always saw himself as a Spurs player, and he's got those same sorts of characteristics. But I was going to mention, Tom, we love getting questions, we love getting comments from all our listeners and all our viewers. A couple on Xavi. One here in particular from, my eyesight's gone this morning, Spotlight on Spurs. Only 10 minutes in, obviously this was written during the game last night, but completely agree about Xavi. His performances recently have been leading up to this, which has made his omissions ever more strange. He is a difference maker in our side, so we need to field a team that gets the best out of him. If you just react to that, I've got another actually stronger set of questions in a moment, Tom. But we love these, don't we? Get in touch. There's a variety of different ways. There's my favourite. There's TikTok. There's Tom B's favourite, Facebook. He's trying to pass that side of the operation on to me, the lazy so-and-so. We've got Instagram. We have got X. What have I forgotten? TA, remind everybody how they can get in touch with us.
YouTube, guys, if you're watching us on YouTube, please do give us a like and a subscribe, because we always find that our numbers watching are really good, but not everyone always does click the button that says like and subscribe, which really helps us, really helps keep the pod going. So if you are watching us on YouTube, please do subscribe. If you're listening to us, then give us a try on YouTube as well. And the email is thetottenhamwaypod@gmail.com, thetottenhamwaypod@gmail.com. So do get in touch, because we're going to be doing a Q&A pretty soon, I think sometime this month, and we're sort of gathering the questions and the great topics and feedback that we're getting. So I think George is on that, so we'll be doing a Q&A pretty soon. So do get in touch with us with anything that's on your mind.
Well, Simon, Tom, has got in touch with us from southwest London, and he's written this. You can sense with a degree of actual fury burning inside him, which is a bit strange after the last couple of results, but everybody is entitled to their own opinion. And Simon says, I am still unconvinced by Thomas Frank. We have players way better than his tactics allow, brackets, if he has any tactics, close brackets, and he keeps being proved wrong. Xavi getting better with regular game time. Tell showing more in his cameo than Odobert in the 60-odd minutes that he was allowed. Moani is class, but Thomas Frank doesn't know how to utilise him to maximise his talent. And Simon goes on to say, Nottingham Forest and Liverpool up next in the league. Not sure if we get more than 2 points from those games. And he finishes off by saying, I doubt very much whether we'll win our next 2 Champions League games to have a hope of a top 8 finish. Deeply frustrating that after 5 months, Thomas Frank has no grasp of his players' talents and best positions. Grrr, he says. Well, I mean, a lot of what Simon has written in that message has been apparent from other supporters over the past few weeks, maybe stroke months. But based on what we've seen in the last week or so, is that a bit harsh, or do you still share some of those concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can be more positive than that, I have to say. Like, I take the broad point about the kind of not knowing maybe his best team, not getting the best out of some of these players. And to be fair to Frank, I think he has admitted that. You know, I think he's been very honest about the fact that he is still looking for his best combinations. You know, it was put to him in a press conference, I think it was last week, you know, very directly, you know, do you know your best team? And he basically said, I think it would be fair to say I don't, you know, and I don't think he thinks of that as a weakness particularly. I think he basically is saying, look, we're 2 or 3 months in, we've done some good things. You know, we've improved the defence. Players are fit and healthy, or healthier than they were last season. I think that, you know, let's not forget there's some really big players like Van der Ven that basically played almost every game, and they were hardly getting on the pitch last season. They're a more solid team. They're better away from home. There have been improvements, but Frank knows that in attack, in the final third, they are still trying to find that fluency. I think Colin is a fair reflection of that. I think Xavi Simons is a fair reflection of that. But I think equally, both of those players, for example, that's not just on Frank. Colin Wani, for example, came in, wasn't match fit, wasn't match sharp, broke his jaw, had a dead leg. He basically had all these different things coming in where he's now, even in December, I think, still getting up to speed. And Xavi Simons is the same. I think you can look at it two ways. Was Frank leaving out Xavi, for the last, couple of weeks? Should he have played him? Or are we now seeing this Xavi who's suddenly coming to the fore because he did have that break? Maybe Frank saying to him, look, just take these 3 games out, have a couple of weeks off, not away from the kind of the limelight of match play, where we just kind of try and build you up again, just to take the pressure off a little bit, and we'll go again, in a couple of weeks. Maybe that was good man management, and I think we would probably say that he should have started that game at home to Fulham. I think that was an error. But I think, you have to look at it in the round and say, well, look, he's playing better now, and you have to give Frank credit for that. So, is it perfect? Absolutely not. I think last night, for example, was a good performance from Tottenham against a poor team. They scored 3 goals. They could have had 2 or 3 more. But I think we're still, waiting for that real kind of click moment, at Tottenham with one of these performances. But I also think Frank would agree with that. I think he would take that on the chin and say, yeah, that's what we're still looking to do. We're still in the early stages.
One other question that several people have posed that I will pose to you before we take a quick break and then look in more detail at who did what last night and who might do what against Nottingham Forest at the weekend. But I don't know if we do take all the credit for this, Tom, but our George, he's always bang on the money. And in the last podcast, the post-Brentford reaction pod, he made the point that, with Dominic Solanke's ongoing injury concerns, and we had no idea what is happening to him at the moment, he was perplexed as to why Tell had not been brought in to the Champions League squad, because there is this rule from UEFA that if someone's out for 60 days, you can bring in a replacement. George then asked the very same question to Thomas Frank at the pre-match press conference. Lo and behold, a few hours later, we suddenly hear that Tell has been brought into the Tottenham Champions League squad. So we certainly like to feel as though the Tottenham Way, and George in particular, has done its bit to help this campaign. Do you think we should take all the credit? Because it was something of an about turn by the club all of a sudden, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful. I think George could soon be another co-sporting director at Tottenham, hire a third one to deal with UEFA logistics and UEFA loopholes. I think that would be George's remit. The timing was curious, I have to say. George's question was good, and it was bang on the money, as always. The club. I mean, to be fair to the club, I think the rule states that you can't. The 6th game, is the last point when you can do it. So after the 6th game, you can't then make that change. So this was sort of the last possible moment. Equally, they could have maybe done it 2 or 3 days ago. So, let's go with the theory that George is essentially running the Tottenham, operation from outside. And I think, we were wondering, does this mean that Solanke's injury is even longer than we think? That it means he's not going to play a part in the rest of the kind of Champions League group games? I think my understanding is that that's not the case, that Solanke can come back in, for example, for the next game against Dortmund at home, if need be. The rule is that if you are out for 60 days, if you have been out for 60 days, then that player can be replaced, which made it possible to bring Tell in, of course. And Frank said to George's question, of course, like if we'd known that Solanke was going to be out for, what's it been now, 3 months, 4 months? Then of course they would have included Tell in from the off. But equally, captain hindsight and all of that, as Ange would say. So, I think it's a good option, obviously, but I think if they can, they'll get Solanke back in for Dortmund, but who knows? I mean, there was a question after the game last night, has Solanke had a setback, because of Tell's inclusion? Frank insisted not. He said there's been no setback. But I mean, what on earth does that even mean? I mean, the whole thing has been a setback. We were being told by the club back in whenever it was, September, that it wouldn't be a long-term thing. It was only a minor problem. So, it's been setback all the way through, and we're still wondering when he's going to come back. And Frank's line at the moment, which he's sticking to, is, "I'll let you know when there's news. Don't keep asking me. I'll tell you when we've got more information," which to me is not particularly encouraging, I have to say.
I must apologise. We have for those of you watching. It's actually, Tom. It looks like the sun's about to actually get you. I mean,
I tried to move along my bench here, but I'm not sure I've escaped the sun. It's sort of following me.
It's a very atmospheric picture there, and I feel like Blofeld from James Bond because my white cat has just come to join us. We'll take a quick break. Yeah, that's better.
Is that better?
That's much better.
Yeah.
We'll take a quick break now that you've saved yourself, and then come back with a few more details on what happened in the game and what Frank might choose to do at Nottingham Forest on Sunday. Well, Tom, we've mentioned the performance of Xavi Simons. Obviously, he's really starting to fire. Mo Kudus, some good quotes I thought from Frank actually about Kudus, and I think he saw it as we all did. He started the season really well, having arrived from West Ham. Definitely had a little bit of a dip, but I feel as though he's back to his best again. We enjoyed the celebration. They were sitting very pretty on those stools after he converted from the penalty spot. So for me, those were the two players that shone in particular. Archie Gray, again, I saw some of his stats, really impressive. I mean, he's such an all-round player. The biggest disappointment for me in the game, Tom, was the unfortunate yellow card for Mickey van der Ven, which means he is suspended now for the Dortmund match. And obviously, once the delight of the result from last night has worn off, that will be a concern in what's obviously going to be a really difficult game, and one that, as I've already said, Spurs have to win. Was Van der Ven just plain foolish to get a yellow card in that manner last night?
I think Frank was really frustrated about it. You could see on the line that Frank, I think he pointed to his forehead at Van der Ven as though, we talked about this. I think it's basically what he was saying. He was basically, I think it suggested to me, not my information but opinion, that he had basically said to Van der Ven, "Look, don't get a yellow card because you'll be suspended." And I think it was an avoidable yellow. And after the game, I think Frank was sort of biting his tongue because someone sort of said, Van der Ven looked frustrated, and Frank basically said, "Yeah, I can see why." And I think he was, minorly irritated about that, because it certainly is a loss for what is now, a big game against Dortmund. Spurs have put themselves in the race here for the top 8. They are in the mix. I think that it's still going to be, as we speak here, I think they are 8th, aren't they, or possibly 9th? Ninth, yeah. So they're 9th, a point behind Liverpool. Of course, the games are still to come tonight, so they might drop down 2 or 3 spots before then. So I still think they'll probably need 2 wins from the final 2 games against Dortmund and then away at Eintracht. 4 points could be enough, but I think they'll probably need 6 out of 6. And although both of those games are winnable, I really think an informed, confident Tottenham can win both of those matches. Dortmund are not having the best of seasons, and we saw that Eintracht last season are very much beatable. So let's not pretend they can't get 6 points out of 6. But I guess you'd say that they might slip up in one of those, right? And anyway, but not having Van der Ven with that Dortmund game is a blow. There's no doubt about that. It was one of the minor negatives of the night, wasn't it? I mean, I think you're right to mention Archie Gray. What did you think of his performance, Marcus? Because I thought he was good again in midfield, wasn't
he? I thought he was excellent. I read a couple of comments after the Brentford game. People go, "Oh, I mean, what does Archie Gray really do? He's just a very average type of player." I couldn't believe it when I read that. His passing is outstanding. I think his positional sense is superb. We're starting to see Spurs fullbacks invert again, a bit like in the early days, especially under Ange Postecoglou. And he's reading that situation, particularly at the weekend when Spence was marauding forward, and he was really good against Brentford. Maybe he's been listening to those saying, "Well, listen, you're good, Jed, but actually Destiny Doggy's a little bit better than you when he goes forward." So Spence says, well, I'll show you that. But I was really impressed that Gray was covering for him. To me, he can do just about anything. And we've seen that he can play in a whole different variety of positions as well. He is still so young, too. I really think that the world is his oyster, and that wherever possible, I'd like to see him in that starting 11. And the fact that he went off relatively early last night, for me, is a good sign, because I think it suggests that Frank intends to use him again from the start at Nottingham Forest on Sunday. And some players just shine. Obviously, of course, the likes of Xavi Simons and James Maddison, you're never going to miss what they are doing on the ball in particular. But for Gray, understated, undemonstrative, but I think an increasingly essential ingredient in this team that Thomas Frank's putting together.
And it's all part of the evolution, isn't it, of the team? Because, I think, we were saying a couple of weeks ago, like, does Frank need to stick with something? Does he need to double down on some players, And for example, Bergvall, I think is, suddenly a little bit on the outside of this 11 right now, of this, what Frank is calling the core. And I think Gray is sort of just pushing himself into that mix, like getting the sort of back-to-back starts in central midfield. I like the way he, alongside Palhinha, I quite like that mix there, of the two of them, where, you have Palhinha's kind of solidity and Gray has a bit more freedom. And I think, you're absolutely right, Marcus, to point out about the fullbacks. I'd forgotten about that. I mean, it was quite a sight, to be honest, to see basically Spence and Porro essentially playing as almost like two number 8s at times. It was very Ange-esque, I have to say.
Yeah.
There's people who want Ange back. Well, look, this is, what more do you want? I mean, you've got the Frank, solidity with Palhinha, and then you've still got the sort of marauding fullbacks as well. It's the perfect blend. And I guess there was something there about the opposition. I think Frank probably said, look, Slavia are going to sit deep, 11 men behind the ball. We need to basically not have all of our back four sitting on the halfway line. Let's be more inventive and try and mix the game up, get the fullbacks into the positions, try and get overloads in those central areas. And I think it worked pretty well. But you're right, what Gray does there is he's intelligent enough to read the game. He's intelligent enough to be relied on. He fills in, and he can do it technically, but also mentally, he sees situations, and I really like that. I have to say, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I was sort of thinking about Gray, and he played that game, was it away at PSG? I'm terrible at remembering which game is which, where he played more advanced, and he had that kind of freedom basically to kind of run about a lot and make runs beyond the defence. So I thought, yeah, this is what Gray's good at. This is what he needs to be. He needs to have that freedom to basically get around the pitch. And the last couple of games, he's played a lot more discipline, as more of a kind of base pivot midfielder almost, where he's hitting people with tackles, he's enjoying the collisions, he's then playing the simple ball a lot. Okay, a few switches here and there, but generally he's playing the kind of like percentage passes, looking for forward passes when he can, but also just kind of rotating the kind of possession as much as he can. And he's looked comfortable in that position. He has as well. And it's that thing. I still think there's a question mark. What is Archie going to be eventually? Is he going to be a number 8, box to box, or are we going to see him as this kind of like, central pivot where he plays from deep? I think he can do both, but I think it would be good for him to really nail down what he wants to be. Because you're right, Marcus, he can do everything, but in a way that's also it sort of holds him back, doesn't it? Because it means he can play in different roles, in different teams, different situations.
You can become a victim of your own versatility. I am listening to every word you're saying. I had some stats and I can't find them. Do you know when your phone gets updated? It's a nightmare. I got updated yesterday. I now cannot even discover the pictures that I've saved in particular for this podcast. But the bottom line, it just showed his very successful pass conversion rate. I mean, every aspect of what he did last night was a tick in the box. I just wish I could illustrate it a little more effectively. I want to ask you about Wilson Odobert. I mean, going back to what Simon said in that question in the first part of the programme, he obviously wasn't over impressed with Odobert, who to me a few weeks ago was really starting to make inroads into, booking a permanent place in the team. And then he's been on the sidelines a little bit, got the nod last night. I kind of felt as though he was starting to do something. It didn't quite happen. So where is he at the moment? What are your thoughts with regards to Tell? This is a triple barrel question for you, Tom, because my good friend Luca, who's obviously Italian, well, obviously he is Italian, he's a producer, and he was telling me that in the Italian press over the past few days, there has been a lot of speculation linking Tell with a move to Roma, which is his team. I mean, I don't know if you've heard that. And also Kolo Muani. So I'm talking about 3 players who we've seen out wide. And I thought, Kolo Muani was fantastic playing out wide on the left against Brentford at the weekend. We had Simon, with that question saying that Thomas Frank doesn't know how to maximise his obvious talents. So with regards to these three wide players, and particularly if we don't get Semenyo, which is looking increasingly unlikely now in January, with more quotes I saw yesterday suggesting he's much more interested in going to one of the big three clubs. How does Frank sort out who should do what out wide?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's a really key question in this team. That left wing spot, and it was quite, pertinent last night, right, with Sonny on the pitch before the game, and you're sort of thinking they're still trying to work out who takes over from Son in that left wing position. And I think Odobert has shown glimpses, I think, in recent weeks of the player that Spurs think they signed, the one they hope he can become. I thought in the game against Man United, I thought he was brilliant in that match. I thought it was the one match where I thought, oh yeah, that's the player they've signed. That's the guy who, can beat people down the flank going wide. He can also come inside. He's got 2 feet. He's quick. He sees things. He looked really impressive in that match. And what's frustrated me is since then he hasn't really kicked on. I think Frank was sort of hoping that would be almost like a match where, now you're in the team. Now the position is yours. Now go and show us. And it hasn't quite happened, I have to say, in the last couple of games. I don't think he's grabbed that opportunity. And Frank was asked about a week ago, I think, about the left wing spot, and I think it was our old friend Dan actually who asked about the kind of succession to Son and whether anyone had nailed it down, and he said, I think it's fair to say there's competition in that position, and I think it's you're saying Tell, Colin Mwani, and Odobert, and they're all in there, and he's played Johnson on the left as well, of course, and Kudus can play there. Xavi Simons has played there as well early on in the season when he just arrived. They're really trying different players there, but I don't think anyone has really grabbed it. I would say Odobert is the one I think they will stick with the longest, I have to say. I think Tell, it doesn't surprise me that there are clubs interested in him because of his game time, and because of the Champions League squad thing. I wouldn't be surprised if Tottenham moved him on in the next couple of windows and saw an opportunity there maybe to build some funds. I think Colin Mwani is an interesting one. I think it's still an open case, I have to say. I think in the last couple of weeks we've seen some really good signs from Colin Mwani, but I think it's still early. I think a lot will depend on what happens in the second half of the season.
I really like Colin Mwani. I love the fact as well that we didn't think he was going to be involved last night because he was limping around the mix zone after the game against Brentford, and yet he recovers. And still this mystery surrounding Dominic Solanke goes on. I mean, let's not go into it again today, but I hope he's okay. I hope there isn't a secondary issue that we haven't been told about, but we need to get to grips with this soon because obviously the transfer window opens in a few weeks. And if he's out for a substantial period of time, he's already been out for a substantial period of time, then there's a gaping hole that Spurs need to look at. Before I ask you about the LGBTQ plus flag controversy, well, it wasn't really a controversy. I think everyone was impressed with the way Spurs dealt with it, but it's posed one or two questions. Your thoughts on Richarlison? I mean, the stat that George gave me at the weekend that I was amazed about, that he'd scored 17 goals in his last 24 starts for Spurs, going all the way back to a really good period he had under Ange Postecoglou. He did start again last night. He's playing a lot of matches. He's staying fit, which is fantastic, of course. Had one long-range effort that was well saved. Could have scored right at the start of the game. What's your assessment of how he's doing overall, particularly bearing in mind that only 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think we were all unanimous in saying that he was having a bit of a mare.
What do you think, Marcus? Because you were basically ending his career a few weeks ago and saying that he was finished as a Tottenham player. And listen, I think, to be fair to you, I think you were saying, that you don't think he's good enough, and he's basically proven that he's not good enough to play for Tottenham regularly as the starting number 9. I mean, have you seen anything in the last few weeks that changed your mind? I mean, as you say, his goal scoring record has been not bad, has it, in the last few weeks?
Do you know, it's fascinating. I cannot make up my mind about the guy because I actually really warm to him. I think it's fair to say that if he plays against you, you can't stand the man. He's down on the ground all the time. He's getting involved in incidents that he's got nothing to do with. And yet, when he plays for you, you sense the passion, the desire, the absolute joy he demonstrates when he does score. You could argue that maybe he's a little bit selfish. It seems to be all about Richarlison. But I am warming to him again. I thought on Saturday against Brentford, he was excellent. His touch more often than not was really good. He was willing, he's running. He'll try and pull defenders out wide, create space for other teammates. So I cannot make up my mind. And yet I'm thinking, okay, so he's starting again against Slavia Prague, but this is a game really where he needs to score. Just to maintain the confidence levels, to make you think, okay, yeah, this is a guy that is going to score on a regular basis. I could not believe that stat that he got 17 in 24, albeit over a long passage of time. So I can't make up my mind. But obviously, if Solanke's not coming back anytime soon, and if Spurs aren't going to go in and spend 60 million on a striker in January, which is a very difficult thing to go and do anyway, he's going to be a critical component in the second half of the season. And to be absolutely honest, I am not certain that long term he's the answer. But I do feel that if Spurs are going to be really successful this season, he needs to click more often than not, because he's going to have to shoulder a very large responsibility.
I mean, I guess the question is it possible to finish in the top four with Richarlison as your number 9? You know, I just think if you look at the teams that Tottenham are up against to get into those top 4, let's say 5 positions for the Champions League, is Richarlison going to give you enough and get you enough goals, do you think, to get you there?
I think probably not, to be honest with you, because he's a bit streaky. He's not reliable. I still keep waiting. I mean, this is the two of the big surprises, and they're good surprises this season, is that Richarlison has stayed as fit as he has, and that Van de Ven, of course, has stayed as fit as he has. I still, every single game when he goes on one of those surging runs, Mickey Van de Ven, I still look very closely at how he is come the end of it, particularly if he goes down in a heap, just dreading the thought of him clutching that hamstring. It hasn't happened, and I want to give the Tottenham medical staff and the player himself 100%, what's the word? Congratulations. Credit. There's the word, credit. For keeping him so fit. But I keep on wondering, it's the same with Richarlison, and that would be the concern if the club decide, yeah, he's the guy that can score the goals to get us into 4th place. And then on the 1st of February, he collapses in a heap and is never seen again. I mean, there's some risks, a lot of risks in putting all your eggs in the Richarlison basket.
I mean, I think Frank, he mentioned this away in Paris, in the press conference where he basically, pointed to Richarlison as one of his success stories, when people were questioning about the effectiveness of the attack. And, there was some slight kind of, sniggering to that I saw online. But I think it's fair, I have to say, he has got Richarlison not only fit, but also to some extent firing, And I mean, the guy clearly has a ceiling. We can't expect Frank to turn him into, the Brazilian Ronaldo. But he is ultimately, he's scoring goals, and he's playing regularly. And I think Frank would say, well, look, I'm getting the best out of what I've got here. It's not my fault I've been dealt the hand where Solanke has, been out for as long as he's been out. And I'm basically making the best of what I've got. And I think that probably is a fair analysis. I mean, it was interesting last night that Richarlison didn't take the penalty. That Kudus took the penalty when I believe that was in the 50th minute, and Richarlison went off he went off later. So Richarlison was still on the pitch. And you think, I don't know. I know he missed that one earlier in the season, but I always like my centre forward to say, nah, that's my job. I'm the scorer, I'm the finisher. I know I missed one, doesn't matter, mate. I'm still on this, because I think the goals are so important to strikers. So I would have liked to have seen him put his hand up and just take that one. But equally, Frank said in the press conference that it was decided before. There was Romero, I think, kind of, making a big thing of who was taking the penalties, and there was some suggestion that, he was the one who was deciding. But Frank said in the presser afterwards that basically Romero was enforcing decisions that had already been made. So I think, Kudus, according to the players who were on the pitch at the time, was the number 1 taker, and then Xavi took the one later on because Kudus had gone off.
Mm. Romero, the enforcer. That's appropriate. And he was a very commanding presence again at the back. Before we go on to Nottingham Forest, A quick word about this LGBTQ business. For those who don't know, a request came in from Slavia Prague to move the flag, which is normally located down in front of the away supporters. They said that it could potentially cause a security issue. Tottenham, I think, essentially took the decision themselves that UEFA fully supported to move the flag to the other end of the ground, and this is the flag that represents the proud lily whites, which is the Spurs LGBTQ supporters group. And I saw a quote from one of their members afterwards, basically saying, well, moving the flag is just giving in to, quote, bigots, but they appreciated that Tottenham were in a difficult situation. The flag was still visible, but this is something that needs to be looked at in future. We've mentioned that the Prague fans themselves were brilliant in terms of the noise that they created, particularly bearing in mind, as you've also said, they've now gone, 17 away games in the Champions League and not seen a single victory. So it's a little bit of a thankless task in that regard. But as good as they were in terms of making a noise, Tom, they have been involved in crowd trouble incidents in the past. And really, should a visiting team have the power or the right even to suggest moving a Tottenham flag in Tottenham's ground?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the club would basically say, let's be clear here. The request was made by Slavia Prague, and the request was agreed to by Tottenham. That there was the UEFA, weren't stepping in here, and basically it's not one of those things where, okay, this is a political banner or a political symbol, and therefore we're banning it. That's not the case here. The request was made by Slavia Prague, and it was Tottenham's decision to basically grant the request. And the request was basically made on security concerns and safety grounds, and we never really actually have found out, what the specifics are there, like what those concerns are. We assume it's because they think the fans, would object to that pride flag being, so close to that northeast corner, and then it could cause, some kind of disturbance or whatever. I guess Spurs would say, we've still got it in the stadium. We've moved it to the southwest corner. I think what I would say is, if the Slavia Prague fans object so much to the pride flag and they cause disturbances and they, smash up the stadium or whatever it is, then they should take the punishment for that. Then they should get the fine that comes from UEFA for doing it. They should get the stadium ban that comes from UEFA for doing things like that. And that should be the consequence of doing something that is clearly idiotic and wrong. There's no reason for Spurs to preempt, the incorrect actions of visiting fans by moving something and therefore avoiding what may or may not happen. I think ultimately it was sort of back to front here, and I sort of have some sympathy, because I think probably Spurs were thinking, okay, look, we keep the flag in the stadium, but let's not, antagonise, or let's not kind of, create disturbance by having the flag right there. But I also 100% agree with the statement, that basically said, you don't dictate what we do in our house. And ultimately, if Spurs feel strongly enough that they can have this flag in the stadium because they feel they want to support the cause, then they should stick through that, through thick and thin. They shouldn't allow a visiting club who have, unreliable fans or idiotic fans. And, we don't know. Let's not accuse Slavia Prague fans of doing something they didn't ultimately do. But if that was the concern, then I don't think Spurs should be accommodating those people. They should be accommodating the people that ultimately they have the cause with, right? Do you agree with that, Marcus?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. And I'm just reading the quote actually that was issued by the Proud Lily Whites group on social media last night. And they say, let's be honest about what this means. The risk here isn't the flag, it's the reaction of a small number of opposition supporters, and that's disappointing. Another reminder of the hostility that LGBTQ plus fans still face across European football. But they went on to, be very supportive of Tottenham as a club. We want to be clear that the club has handled this appropriately. They've been transparent with us. They've pushed back where they could, and they have made sure that this sits firmly as a request from the visiting clubs rather than a decision rooted in Spurs' own values. So It's unfortunate, and I suspect that if this happens again, then maybe a different course of action will be taken. But in the circumstances, I guess common sense has prevailed, and nobody wants to make too big an issue of it. Just before we talk about Nottingham Forest on Sunday, Tom, a word about James Maddison, who, as we mentioned earlier, popped up on television on Monday night, was at the training ground, looking very bright and sprightly. And you think, well, there's Madders on grass. He might be back in the team soon. And Thomas Frank said, no, he's got a very, very long way to go. Yes, well, thank you, Thomas, for being very insightful again in terms of injured players. But it got me thinking, especially when I heard Maddison on television saying that, before he joined the club, he could see himself in a white shirt. He felt like a Tottenham player. And the moment he joined, I remember saying, yeah, he really is an archetypal Tottenham player. What also interested me is that he did say how much he enjoyed playing under Ange Postecoglou. And I must hold up my hand and admit that at the time, because he didn't always start, he wasn't always getting 90 minutes. I had this conspiracy theory that actually something was going on behind the scenes between him and Ange, but not for the first time. It looks as though I clearly misread that picture.
Yeah, you and your conspiracy theories, Marcus. We get emails, don't we, all the time with people with conspiracy theories. I wonder if actually that's you spreading them around.
I think they are, yes.
Yeah, I thought the three main takeaways, I agree. I thought that line about Ange was interesting. He loved playing under him, but he really enjoyed the training. He was basically saying how the training was nearly always, and I think, we sort of, we knew this, right? That it was nearly always about what we wanted to do. Wingers pinned to the touchline was kind of how he puts it. Fullbacks coming forward, everyone rotating. And I really like that thing he said. I don't know if people who have missed it. Maddison said, he showed us clips basically of where we had the fullbacks playing as number 10s, we had the number 10s playing as fullbacks. And he said, that can happen. I don't mind that on the pitch. If we have the ball, I don't mind our striker filling in at right back and our right back playing up front. That rotation and that freedom was what we always wanted to play. And Maddison, he said he just, when it was going well, he said he absolutely loved it. He enjoyed it. And I think that's completely fine, by the way. We can all have our reservations about, Postecoglou's methods and whether or not it worked or didn't work. But there's no doubt that when it was going well, it was brilliant to watch, and I'm sure it was absolutely, brilliant fun to play under as well. And the second thing, I agree, that stuff that Maddison said about, always being able to see himself as a Tottenham player. I mean, it's good PR, right? We should say that. I think he knows that he's saying the things the fans want to hear. But he did also openly say, I'm not just saying this to kind of, get the fans on side. I have always seen myself as a Spurs player. And I think it's believable, because of all the reasons you just said there, Marcus. When he did join, I think we all felt that he was a natural fit for Tottenham, and maybe Maddison had always been able to see himself as a Tottenham player because they tried to sign him so many times. I mean, they tried to sign him when he was at Coventry. They thought about signing him when he was at Norwich. They basically throughout his whole career, thought about signing Maddison. So I'm sure he probably heard from Daniel Levy about 6 or 7 times before he actually, he probably had one speed dial by the time he actually signed for them, up from Leicester City. But yeah, I mean, Spurs miss him, right? They really miss him. I think it was encouraging, obviously small steps, but it was encouraging. I think he said, I'm way ahead of where I should be or something. Or I think he said, I'm doing really well for the stage I'm at, So I think that's, let's take that for now, and hope that he can at least play at some point this season.
Well, the way things are going, he'll probably play before Solanke and Kudus, who I hear has now gone abroad to continue his rehabilitation. Radu Dragutin, he's playing for the the local school under 15s or something to get his fitness back. All these mixed messages that keep coming about our injured players.
Kulusevski was, I think it came from his Instagram where he was basically, shown in some very snowy location. It looked like he was doing some sort of thermal things, with steam coming up from nice hot baths. I don't know, that kind of thing. I mean, it looked to me like a jolly, I've got to say, it looked to me like a sort of a Christmas break with his wife. But Frank was insisting, this is all part of the recovery, part of the recovery process. So, Kulusevski was due. I think the whole idea was that December was the hope for Kulusevski. We're obviously in December now. So we're kind of hoping for more positive news in the next couple of weeks. But I should say, Kulusevski is on that list that Frank has given us, where he basically says, no news until I give you news.
Well, exactly. So when he says December, we assume it's December of 2025. And when he says that Destiny Udogie is back in January, I'm hoping he means January of 2026. But you just can't be sure of anything. What we actually can be sure of is a game at Nottingham Forest on Sunday afternoon. And of course, Forest don't play in the Europa League until Thursday night. So Tottenham have got a 48-hour advantage in terms of preparing for that particular game. And in terms of the selection, oh, by the way, I do want to just mention Ben Davies, who of course came on last night, now in his 11th season at the club, whipped in a really good corner as well. And who knows, he might have a significant role to play over the next few weeks as the games keep coming thick and fast. But with our favourite game in mind, Thomas Frank Bingo, what do you think he should do? What is he going to do to try and pick up 3 points? 3 really important points, I think it's fair to say, at Forest to maintain the revival and set Spurs up for a huge game against Liverpool the following weekend.
Yeah, I think this is we had that message come into me earlier in the pod. Forgive me, I can't remember who it was from now, but he's saying, Forest, Liverpool coming up. I actually think they're 2 good games for Spurs now. If you told me they were going away to Forest, I don't think that's a bad fixture for Spurs. Obviously famous last words. It's not an easy one. Certainly not as easy as it was a few weeks ago under Mr. Ange. But I think Spurs can go there and get a result here. They've got some momentum. They've got 2 wins under their belts on the back of a really good point away at Newcastle. And we know Forest under Dyche are going to be hard to beat, hard to break down. There's obviously the Gibbs-White factor as well. We've already had Eze scoring a hat-trick against Spurs. Let's see what Gibbs-White does, in this fixture. But I look at these 2 games, Forest away, and, everyone wants to play Liverpool at the moment. You don't want to play Liverpool in 2 months' time where they've suddenly, got their mojo back. Everyone wants to play Liverpool right now. So I think Spurs can go into these 2 fixtures with some confidence. And Forest, you're right to point out, they're playing Thursday night away at Utrecht. What's that, Marcus, on you? You got a cat there, or?
Yeah,
Just see some furry ears.
My James Bond villain cat really wants to get involved, and so this is why you need to be on YouTube, everybody. Meet Mimi, who's obviously got the right colour fur. Get down. Sorry. Was that the other day? We saw a sort of like ghostly presence in the background of your video. I don't know if was that Mimi as well, or was that something in your study? I'm not. Well, I think it was my wife, but I'm not sure. I need to look. I think she was creeping around, trying not to get involved in the picture. But some things have gone missing in the house, so there could be a ghostly presence. I'm not. Don't tell Mrs. Buckland that I called her a ghostly presence. I'm sure. She'll hear that, Tom. You're in the doghouse, mate. Anyway, before Mimi's very welcome interaction. I think this is a good fixture. Who are they going to play in this team? Oh, God knows. This is where we need George, right? I think. Let's think about, for example, Archie. Is he going to start a game for the 3rd time in a week? And I think it's a real interesting, I think, sort of microcosm at the moment of what Frank is thinking. Is he wanting continuity? Is he going to stick with a team and certain players in his core, in inverted commas, because he's starting now to get something? He gets some momentum, get wins under his belt. Or is he still, thinking, actually, 2 games in a week, we bring in Pape Sarr, we bring Bentancur back in, for example, and we keep that kind of rotation going, and we keep the freshness, we avoid injuries, etc., etc. And that's obviously the balance that he's having to strike right now, as he's now got a team that's sort of getting some confidence going, and ideally you want to stick with it. But obviously, this is a crammed December schedule. They don't want to suddenly pick up more muscle injuries, so they have to make those decisions. I think he'll probably err on the side of keeping the core together, and that is obviously the back 4, which now kind of picks itself because Udogie is out injured. I suspect Davies, by the way, will have to play some minutes, and maybe even start one in the next few weeks, but I don't think in this game. And then I think Palhinha is still in the core, particularly in an away game. I think he'll be one of the midfield 2, and then it'll be whether or not he keeps Gray. I suspect he'll bring in possibly Bentancur or even Sarr back in there, particularly with Gray on the back of he's recently had a muscle injury, so he won't want to overexert him. And then I think the core of the front 4 is, I think, does Xavi play again away at Forest? Do you want to see him in that fixture? He must. He's got to, Tom. Particularly as there's a bit of a break before the next game. Don't rest him now when he's flying. Let's really capitalise on that. I think you're right. I think Xavi plays, and I think Kudus probably has to play.
and then you could mix up the wing with Odebear. I think he could bring in, possibly someone else in that position, possibly Colin Wanning or so on, back in there, and you probably keep Richarlison, particularly for the physicality. I think against Forest, you probably keep Richarlison. So who knows? But I think that is the big question. I think now I'm interested in seeing in the coming weeks. Does Frank kind of more and more? Do we see less rotation, less tweaks, less system changes as well?
I hope so. I hope so, Tom. Listen, he's had a difficult opening few months, fully entitled to try all the different combinations, all the different tactics, and we know he can be very flexible. But it's starting to work, and I've said it a couple of times now. Let's go with this. Let's show some consistency in terms of team selection, and I think that will also lead to some more consistent results as well. But what do I know?
I mean, I just wanted to say that Frank has been in better mood recently. It's really been noticeable in our interactions with him, and we've had a lot of time with Thomas in the last few weeks because there's been so many games. He seems more since Newcastle. I think he seems to be much more upbeat, more confident in press conferences. I think he's more sure of himself. I've seen a slightly different Frank, I think, in the last couple of weeks, where he just seems to be a bit more open, I think, as well about some of the vulnerabilities. I think he's accepting, that actually maybe in those first couple of months, he sort of wanted to pretend like everything was okay. Maybe he wanted to give off the aura all the time that he was very much in control. But I think we've seen in the last couple of, actually, I think it's fine for him sometimes to say, yeah, you're right. I don't know my best team. Or, you're right. That's something we haven't quite got right yet. And I think fans like that. I don't think they need a manager to kind of pull the wool over their eyes all the time. I think he's getting more confident with it. I'm seeing a coach now who suddenly seems to be, I think he's learning a lot quickly on the job, Frank. And we expect the kind of coaches to go into these big jobs, and to be ready-made right from the start. But just like Xavi Simons, just like a player coming in from a different league, I think Frank is also learning and adapting at Spurs quite quickly, and he's smart, and I think he's picking up as he's going along. But I see this next few weeks. I look at the fixtures. I don't know about you, Marcus. I see the fixtures coming up. I think there are a lot of winnable games there for Spurs. They've got a nightmare February where they basically play all the good teams at once. But there's a chance here to build some momentum, I think.
Fingers crossed. Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, Frank is learning. He's learning from George Sessions more than anybody else about his Champions League lineup. And I know that George will be on the phone to him later today. I think he'll be saying, start Archie Gray. We've got influence inside the Tottenham hierarchy. I think that's it, Tom. Thank you very much indeed. So everybody get in touch. Again, Tom gave the details earlier. Spotify is a good way to leave a message as well. I look to respond to any of those. YouTube, I mean, you've got to watch this edition because Tom went from a very sort of normal background to a total eclipse of the sun, and now we've got him in his full glory once again. I thought
we were red-faced as well, so we've got some sunburn. I
thought we'd agreed to get rid of the earphones going round the chin look. Meeting. We had a top meeting yesterday, and you brought that up. And we had an AGM in the King's Cross coffee shop. It was very very therapeutic, as was this podcast. Thanks very much to Tom Allnutt of the Times. I am Marcus Buckland. We'll be back on Sunday after the Nottingham Forest game. Do get in touch. And as always, come on, you Spurs.